Right, it's 7 a.m. on Thursday morning. I've got a really important message that I want to share with you today. But first, I'm taking you with me to my one-to-one jiu-jitsu session this morning. Let's go.
Oh yeah. Come on, I want to get like 5 pounds in. Yeah. I'm going to put anything forward. His head. Good. Yeah. That's very different. Yeah, right in. Yes. Nice. Your head in. Yes. Good. You only got us now. Good. Good. Yes. 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 Yay. Beautiful. I'm 180 degrees. Right in the head. Nice, man. Good work, man. Thank you, bro. Good shit. Good shit.
Just got back from jiu-jitsu, fresh out the shower, and I want to share something with you today that I've been talking about with clients recently, and it's really hit the mark for many of them. We all go through those periods where we're struggling, where execution feels almost impossible. Momentum has stopped. We're not hitting the numbers that we want inside of our business. But I want to ask you a question. When you're in that state, what is your instinct? Be honest. For years, mine was always to just push harder, to work more hours, to grind through it. And I think for a lot of us, that makes total sense on paper as well. Like, if my output is the problem, then surely more input will fix it. Come on, that seems logical, right? Except here's where things get messy. When I was in those periods feeling that way, and I had that attitude of just grinding harder as being the only solution, working more hours, the thing that was always first to get dropped was what I call the engine. No more training, no more jiu-jitsu, eating for convenience rather than function. Ultimately sacrificing and putting myself on the back burner because I believed that that was what was required in order to throw myself at the business. But then without fail, every single time there would be this point where I would massively dip, and that would be both mentally and from a performance standpoint. I would head very close to burnout. And I'd typically be laying there in bed after a really busy week, usually on a Friday night, and I'd be thinking, I'm doing more, I'm working harder, and yet I feel worse. I feel worse within myself, and objectively, my productivity and output hasn't improved. I'm likely less productive and more exhausted before I made this commitment to sacrifice myself and grind harder. And that right there is the paradox that I'm talking about. And I genuinely think that this is one of the biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs that are higher up on that ADHD spectrum continue to make. We think that working and prioritizing the engine is a luxury. We view training, let's say, as self-care. We think eating the right food and going to the gym is only appropriate when we have the right amount of space or time to do so, when my diary is calmer or I have a clear enough runway to go and do the thing. But it's not. Your engine is actually the foundation that everything else sits on top of. Now, I want to be clear, I'm not approaching this from a health and fitness standpoint. I'm not talking about training just to get mad gains. I am talking about viewing your engine as the foundational layer that everything else cognitively sits on top of. And I created something a few weeks ago that I want to show you because I know it's going to help you to understand this. Now, what you're currently looking at is called the execution stack. And if you are listening to this on Spotify or the podcast, I want you to view this as a pyramid. And this is a pyramid which is acting like an execution hierarchy. So think of it like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where all of the base layers of this pyramid need to be met. Otherwise, we cannot ascend to the next level. Now, at the very bottom of the pyramid, phase one, level one, is wiring. This is understanding your brain, your energy patterns, your dopamine cycles, when you're sharp, when you crash, understanding the hardwire that we have as hunter brains. You've likely heard me talk about this a lot. And then we have level two, And this is the one that we're talking about today. This is the engine. Everything to do with your physical body. Sleep, movement, nutrition. Think of the basics. But these basics are present for likely a different reason as to why you've been told to prioritize them before. Because the principle here is simple. The engine comes before everything else. It comes before setting the arena, finding your target, setting the hunt, stipulating your weekly rhythms, developing your internal armor, and building the machine where the strategies around the business and building the business around your brain actually lives. None of this matters if the engine is offline, because you cannot outwork or out-strategize a depleted brain. And it's here that we ensure the brain has the neurochemical and physical fuel that is required to actually execute in the first place. And beyond just understanding how your brain is different to other people and that your brain is not the problem, it's typically just all of the other factors not being aligned or in the right environment that are, the engine always needs to be the first investment. Because without the biological fuel, the brain literally cannot perform the cognitive tasks required at these higher levels. No amount of planning, environment design, or willpower is going to compensate for an empty tank. And the problem that I see all of the time when I start talking to people, let's say they're working on this on their own, or they're working with other coaches, consultants, whatever, is that they are working on these areas up here. They're focusing on the machine, so the strategies, the tactics of how they can build a better business. Or they're focusing on the rhythm, which is more like how we're operating across the week. The daily rituals, the weekly rhythms. These are almost like what would be deemed as the productivity hacks that people are following. But again, if these layers underneath are not switched on, none of that matters. Because again, you can have the best systems in the world. You can have the clearest priorities, the most beautiful Notion dashboard or Google Sheet. But if your brain is not operating on a biological foundation, you are building on sand. Everything else is just futile and frankly, a waste of your time and money. Now I want to share a little bit of the actual neuroscience here because I think for some people, like myself, that like to know the deeper why behind things, this will help it click into place for you. When I get off the mats after jiu-jitsu, my brain is in a completely different state if I was to compare that to just rolling out of bed and coming straight onto my laptop. And there is a specific reason for this. Exercise, particularly something like jiu-jitsu that is of higher intensity, triggers the release of something called BDNF. And that stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. A neuroscientist called John Ratey once described it as being like miracle grow for your brain, which is a pretty cool way of looking at it. So essentially, it promotes the growth of new neural connections within your brain. It increases something called neuroplasticity, which is your brain's ability to learn, adapt, and retain information. And it usually spikes for a number of hours after intense exercise. So that window right after intense training is your peak cognition window. That is when your brain is most primed for focus, problem solving, and retention. Now for me, I've built something called a morning momentum routine, which is specifically designed around this and to help me get into a state of momentum before lunch. Again, I help all my clients to build this out for themselves as well. And what that allows me is a window of time after that morning, let's say training, to get a deep block of work done. And this is where I'll typically put the highest leverage activities in my business, creating videos like this for you guys, creating trainings and models for my clients, or solving the biggest constraint inside of my business. And I do all of this intentionally. It's all done on purpose and by design. And that's what I believe is missing for so many of these entrepreneurs that are higher up on the ADHD spectrum, is that we are not operating by design. We are operating by default, by standards that other people have told us we should be operating by. And that is why it doesn't work. That is why things feel hard. That is why you're constantly having these fleeting moments of high performance and then crashing. And that's where a large portion of your frustration comes from. I would bet my house on it. So here's the pattern that I see for most ADHD entrepreneurs, and I want you to genuinely reflect on this. Business gets busy. Things get hard. That's the nature of the game. And in those periods of time, your execution is likely going to feel like it's slowing down. It's being compromised. You're not performing at your best. What goes first? Training. And then your sleep suffers. And then your diet goes out the window. And then you're running your engine on empty. And then the consequence of that is your output drops further. You feel more guilty, more shame, more frustration. And your natural instinct is to work harder, to make up for it, to compensate. And the cycle and the vice that you are currently in just tightens until it snaps. And that's when you burn out. That's when you crash. You hit this point of wondering, am I even cut out for this? Why am I even in business in the first place? And we start having these mini existential crises. Now, the execution stack, which I've just showed you today, tells us that this way of operating, this way of thinking is backwards. When your execution is struggling, when things get hard, this is not the time to sacrifice the engine. This is actually the time that we need to protect it more aggressively, because your engine is the thing that's actually going to give you the cognitive resources that you need to solve the problem or constraint that's actually present in your business right now. And believe me, I know it is counterintuitive. It is not going to feel natural or normal for you when you start doing this. It didn't for me either. But think about it. If your brain isn't operating at the standard that you know it's capable of, or you want it to, working more hours isn't gonna fix it. You're just putting in more hours at a reduced capacity versus working fewer hours at full capacity. Which one do you think is going to get more done? And here's the question I actually want you to sit down with and chuck your answer to this in the comments, because I'm genuinely curious. When your business gets hard, and I mean really hard, you're feeling stressed out, you're overwhelmed, maybe you're feeling behind, what's the first thing that you sacrifice? Because I bet it's the thing that's sitting at the foundation of your execution. And when you focus on that, you'll be able to ascend through the execution stack and focus on what actually matters. Focus on solving bigger problems inside of your business. Focus on building a business around your brain. But until you work through the wiring, the engine, your arena, your target, your rhythm in order, and you get all those foundational layers in place, none of it matters, because you as the operator are not optimized. There's no point looking at the operation if the operator is not in a state that is fit to run the operation. Anyway, that's what's been rattling around my brain for the last week. Hopefully that's landed for you. Let me know in the comments. And at this point, you know what you should be doing: protecting the engine.